and an attempt to understand. 2, ask sincere questions with attempt to increase comprehension and compassion. 3, speak from your own perspective and be honest and succinct. And 4, focus on the ideas rather than the person in the moments of tension. Can we all agree to those?
Yes.
So, I'm going to go into our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land that we are gathered on today is the unceded territory of the Wiyot, Whubba, Karuk, Matola, Tullawa, Wailaki, and Yura. We honor them and all neighboring tribes by our ongoing commitment to developing trusting, reciprocal, and long-lasting partnerships. I got all I need. But anyway, welcome to our event. We got a long list of speakers lined up tonight. So first and foremost to the stage, I would like to welcome the Provost of Cal Poly Humboldt, Ms. Jan Kemp, and the Reverend. Do I write both of y'all up at the same time? Yeah. And the Reverend, Molly King. Thank you.
And so I'm only going to take a couple of minutes as I'm going to hand it over to Molly to say some illustrious words. But I do have a few things to say, one of which is, many of you are aware, I was present on the campus at Cal Poly Humboldt during the protests and associated occupation. And I very much struggled about what I was going to come and say to y'all today, right? It was a very, very difficult time. And it'd be really nice to be able to wrap it up into a nice, neat bow and have the perfect thing to say. And I don't. What I can tell you is that as many of you all witnessed in your seats as community members, as students, as people that care deeply about this community and our campus, is that harm happened on our campus. And I'd really like to just take a second to acknowledge that and really apologize about how awful and horrible that was. And so my experience, the way in which to move forward is to acknowledge harm, and then to seek to try to repair that and create safety, honor perspectives, work on empathy, and create relationships. And so I'm here tonight. I didn't need to be, but yes, I did. I very much needed to be here tonight as a way to lean into difficult moments, because that's really what higher ed is all about. It's tackling those messy and complicated emotional topics, engaging with our community, admitting when things don't go the way we had hoped, and attempting to reset and to learn from those things and try again. And so we will keep trying, and I will lean in and I will be here and try in community with each and every one of you. I am absolutely 110% out of my depth on this topic. I know so little, and hence why I want to be here to learn and to listen and be a part of this community. What I can offer to you, just as a testament to, in good faith that I'm here on behalf of the university and on behalf of myself, really, as some of you may know, people that know me, I'm a counseling psychologist by training. My life's work is trying to heal and help people. That's what I care deeply about. And I've had some wild experiences in life, some really difficult ones. But I'll give you 2 examples super quick. I worked in an emergency department in Aurora, Colorado, and received the victims of the theater shooting the night that happened. Okay? And I could spend an hour up here talking about that. At the same time, I spent a lot of my life's work testifying on behalf of young people who've received sentences like life without the possibility of parole. Those might seem like opposite things, right? working to address trauma for Columbine victims. About a year after that, I was transporting an adjudicated youth who was an attempted school shooter in my car. Once again, you might go, well, how in the world could you make that pivot? Right? To me, figuring out how to engage in those really hard things when you're on and thinking about all perspectives and how you can engage and change and be a part of that is precisely how we move forward. So I invite you to consider, when we're in this space, as Kente did such a great job of offering some nice ground rules, to invite you to think about it in that way too. I'm really grateful to be included in this event this evening. Really appreciate the intentional space that's been created to have these difficult conversations, and I hope the time together is really positive and productive and provides our community an opportunity to talk to each other, and especially with those that we disagree with. So thank you for including me.
Is this mic still on? It is. Welcome, everyone. I am Reverend Molly Cade, the Secretary of the Humboldt Interfaith Fellowship, one of the organizations sponsoring this event, these conversations. Thank you for being here tonight. The current trauma expressed in the Middle East is based on much historical trauma. What should our responses be? I believe we must find compassion in learning the region's all too human history. Those on various sides certainly know the grievances of their own side. But who will speak the histories of all sides at once? Who will insist on compassion for all the sufferers? We can. We can speak of the common ground of trauma. My focus is on a brief event almost unimaginable in our time. On January 3rd, 1919, 2 weeks before the start of the Paris Peace Conference at the end of World War I, the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement was signed. A little note about the first sentence of this coming agreement, which I'm about to read to you. It's going to mention the Arab Kingdom of Hijaz, the much sought-after Arab state, agreed to by the British in 1916. Here's the text of this agreement. His Royal Highness, the Emir Faisal, representing and acting on behalf of the Arab Kingdom of Hijaz, and Dr. Chaim Weizmann, representing and acting on behalf of the Zionist organization. Stop there for a moment. Imagine these two speaking directly to one another. It's hard to picture in our time. It goes on to say, mindful of the racial kinship and ancient bonds existing between the Arabs and the Jewish people, and realizing that the surest means of working out the consummation of their natural aspirations is through the closest possible collaboration in the development of the Arab state and of Palestine, and being desirous further of confirming the good understanding which exists between them, have agreed, and here I'm just summarizing one of the 6 points, the more salient one, to work together to encourage immigration of Jews into Palestine on a large scale, while protecting the rights of the Arab peasants and tenant farmers, and to safeguard the free practice of religious observances. Much went wrong. After this shining moment, and I would suggest to us that this moment, that this little blip in time, this tiny agreement, is the vision we need to carry forward. It's not just something we hope for in the future. It's already occurred in the past, 105 years ago. It can happen again. and tonight will be some more about how that came to pass, I'm sure. But I want you to hold that vision, that all of us have a common human interest in peace, a common human interest in creating a world where our families and our communities can thrive. That all of us are here to be a part of a promised land, however we may name it. Can we go forward and take into our hearts the traumatic suffering of all of those in conflict then and now? Will we use our knowledge of this traumatic history as a bridge between Palestinian Americans and Jewish Americans who seek common ground? Here we have hope. So welcome to this evening's conversation.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. First of all, thank you all for being here. My name is Abu Bakr. I've been an imam for 14 years, the leader of the Muslim community in Northern California. It is an honor to be here with you all in this loving and neighborly gathering. God says in the Holy Quran, that which loosely translates to, O you who believe, be ever-standing bastions of justice. That's who we should be. That's what we are commanded to not only see ourselves as, but to be ever-standing bastions of justice, witnesses for God even against your own injustices, or your parents or relatives. Whether rich or poor, God is more befitting. So follow not your ego and whims, lest you stray from justice. And if you lean or turn away from that, it is God who is ever aware of that which you do. I ask you to join me in a prayer here on this blessed evening. Our Lord and Creator, Master, Sustainer, we ask you to bless us and our community to come together upon that which you love. We ask you to make us messengers of peace and justice. Make us your voices for the voiceless and helpers of the oppressed. Make us exemplars of humanity and humble service. Allow us to heal through truth and justice, to atone for our complicity in evil by making a true commitment to turn the wave against injustice. Our Lord, we are guilty of being silent and biased. We ask you to remove our biases so that we honor the sanctity of life, of children, whether they are from California, Gaza, Columbine, or Ashkelon. To make us all as a community hear and heed the cries of the oppressed, no matter their race or religion. To show our gratitude for the many blessings in these beautiful cities of Eureka and Arcata, to come together with such love and solidarity for those who are being downtrodden by our tax money, that we remove the veils of confusion and procrastination that enable evil and injustice. Make our voices united and loud so that we may inspire a ripple across our nation and the world that brings a wave of peace, justice, and relief for those who are being hurt by us. Forgive us if this is too little or too late. We are embarrassed to stand in front of you and say these things given our silence, but allow us, with this initiative of coming here, to begin that change towards that which you love. Enable us always to be ever standing in your love for that which you love. Amen.
I'm sorry. I should have called you up in the beginning. I forgot that we had changed the program, and I did not write that down, that he was supposed to have given an opening prayer. So my apologies to you and to you, Abu Bakr.
Oh, no worries.
All right. Thank you. So our next presenter, speaker, shall I say, to come up, not presenter, to come up and talk about Nakba and the Holocaust, Professor Kepi.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming back. Last night, I talked about layers in trying to understand these issues and talk about history. And tonight, I'd like to talk about sort of the social psychology that how examining collective trauma can help us understand what has been happening. And in a very timely way, my new edition of the New York Review arrived today with an article called Living the Nakba, written by a Palestinian journalist who's reviewing two books. One written by, both books about someone's father, one who was exiled from Jaffa to Ramallah, and the other who remained in Israel as one of what they call the 48, the people whose villages were not destroyed in the Nakba. And his description of the struggles that he had, I think is a really, really good descriptive example of what we're talking about when we talk about collective trauma. He said, Palestinians have long argued that the Nakba is not a finite event, but an ongoing process of violent dispossession. Since Zionists started colonizing Palestine at the end of the 19th century, our social fabric as Palestinians has been torn apart, our land occupied, our archives and communal knowledge erased, our loved ones murdered, exiled, or incarcerated, and our people dispersed from their homeland. Now, we know what trauma is. It's a significant injury, either physical or psychological, that has long-term impact on the individual. When we talk about collective or historical trauma, it's more than just the sum of parts. It's more than just collecting everyone's stories. Because what we see with collective trauma or historical trauma is an assault not only on individuals, but on a culture and on a collective people. And it tears apart the fabric of society, as this author is stating here. And societies with a history of trauma are in a constant process of trying to figure out, what does this mean for us? Where do we go from here? Not so much as an attempt to understand what happened in the past, but to figure out what it means for the present. As I said last night, quoting the historian Lucy Davidovich, we look at the past through the prism of the present and try to discern the future. So that's the task that people who have seen the destruction of their society face as they try to put this together. Something else that I mentioned last night was that in forming the state of Israel, the idea was a traumatized people ended up traumatizing the people who lived there before. And that is something that has to be acknowledged. And that aspect of it also fits with collective trauma. Because collective trauma is not limited to the people who suffer. It also affects the people who induce that suffering. And the people who induce the suffering have to deal with that. They have to come to understand how that happened, what does it say about them, and how do they move forward with that. What tends to happen is that those people initially deny that it happened, minimize what happened, or come up with some explanation for how the victims actually caused that to happen. And we see this repeated over and over and over again. So we have these two traumatized people. So the Holocaust was the culmination of centuries of discrimination against the Jewish population by Christians. And it's important to note, they weren't discriminated against by Muslims, as Imam was saying last night. But for Christians, repeated pogroms, forced conversions under torture, isolation in ghettos, restriction from full involvement in society, and whenever anything would go bad, if the crops failed, if disease went through the community, it was almost inevitable that the Jews were going to be blamed for it and pay a price for it. So the Holocaust was not a one-up, but it was exceptional in its ferocity, it was exceptional in its organization, and it was exceptional in how it involved so many people who were bystanders to it and allowed that to happen. So 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis. That's 80% of the European population of Jews. Those who survived were exceptionally traumatized by the event as well. And that doesn't end, but that's another thing about collective trauma. It doesn't end with that generation. It is passed on to subsequent generations because it becomes part of how you identify who you are. Now, when I said that the perpetrators or the bystanders have to deal with this, several years ago, when I was a research assistant with Sam Oliner, I did a study on Jewish resistance to the Holocaust. There's a myth of Jewish passivity in the Holocaust. And myths persist because they serve a lot of purposes. For anti-Semites, it was like, well, what do you expect, right? That's just Jewish people. For the Allies, it gave them cover for not having intervened in a stronger way to stop it. But what's interesting is that it had an effect in Israeli society as well. Because they said, we are going to create a new Jew, one who is militant, one who is strong, and one who will resist any attempts to take us down. And they felt that the European Jewry had allowed this cult. They called it a sheep to the slaughter. It's actually not accurate. It's one of those historical myths. There was a tremendous amount of resistance, but most of it happened in the Soviet Union. And because Jews were transported from the West to the Soviet Union, and because the Cold War started right after World War II, and because Stalin was not about to celebrate Jewish heroes at the time that he was organizing the program against Jews, we didn't get that story. And it didn't emerge until much, much later in archives to document the number of people who joined resistance, who fought against this, and did everything that they could to do it. So you have a society that emerges in Israel that says never again, but that never again has two different meanings. For some people, it's we are going to be so strong and we are going to be so implacable that no one will be able to challenge us. For others, it was because this happened to us, we need to make sure it doesn't happen to other people, right? And of course, Israeli society, depending on which government is in charge, you emphasize one or the other of those. So if we look again, so you have this group that moved there and said, we're going to establish a Jewish state here, and we are going to displace the population of Palestinians here because we can't create a Jewish state. Ben Gurion said, I have 3 goals. I want a Jewish state, I want it in the historic land of Israel, and I want it to be a democracy. And they said, well, we can't do that. We've got a Palestinian population, so we need to dispel it. And that was a deliberate policy. Now, there were gangs. There were things that happened that were not under the control of the actual organized Israeli army. But it was still government policy to remove those people. 750,000 people were driven out of their homes. 530 villages were completely destroyed. 15,000 people were killed. people tried to come back afterwards, they were either killed or forcibly removed. There were a small number of Palestinians who remained in Israel, and they were under military occupation, military government until 1966. They had no freedom of movement. They were actually experiencing something that people in the West Bank today are experiencing as well. So what was the response of Israeli society to the Nakba? Well, part of it was, we will not only remove the people, we will remove their culture. Names of towns and places were changed. Their archives, any historical documents were removed and destroyed. They were, the language of it, all mentions of Palestine in the history books were removed. Any discussion of the expelling of the Palestinian population wasn't allowed. In fact, as late as 2018, they passed a law that this is kind of like, diversity and inclusion in our schools here. They passed a law that said, if you discuss this in your schools, or refer to the day of the Nakba as a day of mourning, you will lose all funding for your schools. They initially wanted to make it a crime to make that comment, but they didn't end up doing that. So it has been erased from society. How is it possible that you could have people, including the wife of Benjamin Netanyahu, when he met with King Hussein and his wife, to say there was nobody here? It was a land with no people for a people with no land. How could they believe that? Well, if you came after that, if you weren't directly involved, no one was going to really make a point of it in Israeli society. So initially you have denial. Leon Uris, the novelist, wrote a book. And I can't remember the name of the book, I think it's The Hajj. Wrote a book which said all of these people left willingly. They just decided on, and actually their religious leaders told them that they needed to leave. And that was the premise of the book. So, historical myths. The other thing too is to minimize it. To say, there was actually the argument made that all of these people were just migrant workers. They really didn't have any ties to the land. So you have that, we will explain this, or just to simply say, yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's what we had to do. So what does that leave the people of Palestine? What does that do to their identity? And it's ongoing, as he points out in this article. And I just want to close with it the way that he closes this article. It says, in Gaza, the Zionist effort to erase Palestine is at its starkest. It's excruciating to witness, even as we know that the Nakba is not confined to the moments of spectacular violence. It persists in the relentless grind of colonization, in our mundane, every routines, and in the ghosts that haunt our domestic lives. We come to see ourselves as part of a multi-generational struggle for a homeland, a struggle that stretches beyond any of our lifetimes, but still shapes our own search for belonging and our most intimate identity of self. That's the challenge. That's what they're facing. Now, it's not uniform within Israeli society. There are groups that recognize this, that acknowledge it. There are psychologists who are studying this and looking at the comparison of it. At the same time that this is going on, there has been a tendency to wipe away the Holocaust on part of some Palestinians, saying it wasn't as severe, so initially there were some that said it didn't happen. As unfortunate. They just didn't plan enough, and they didn't have enough supplies to feed the Jews, and so, you know, they were just forced to do this. It really wasn't their fault, right? It was just poor planning. So there is this denial on both sides, because everyone wants to be the victim. When I was presenting a paper on the role of the church in the Holocaust back in the 90s, and there was a Catholic priest in the audience who challenged that and claimed that the Poles were the victims of the Nazis and that they bore no responsibility for the Holocaust. And by the way, there's now a law in Poland that you cannot claim that the Poles coordinated with the Nazis. And someone stood up who was a Holocaust survivor, and he told the story of what it was like for him and how the Poles treated him when he came out of the camps. And so you had this thing where the Catholic priests say this, and the Holocaust survivors say this, and it was dueling victims, right? And I said, this is not really very helpful, because if you've lost your home, if you've lost your family members, the numbers really don't count. The trauma is there, and the trauma takes its place. So our task, even here from afar, is to acknowledge both sides. To acknowledge that the suffering of both sides affects the behavior of both sides. And figure out some way to channel that trauma, to remember that, to recognize it on both sides, and recognize the need for healing. So I'm not sure if we have any time for questions. How's our time?
We can get a couple minutes.
Okay. Yes.
Hold on, got you.
You said that there's a denial on both sides. Kind of the reason being that everyone wants to be a victim.
It's much harder to be to identify yourself as a perpetrator than to identify yourself as a victim. One writer, just said that there's always this challenge, that it's much easier to say, I'm an innocent victim, than it is to say, I'm at fault here.
What about the people behind you and the names of children? Would you say those are victims?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Would
I
you
mean, we're
say
talking about a collective societal response to things.
Let's let this person finish their question.
Okay.
Would you say that they're denying anything and they're just wanting to be a victim?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I mean, there are people who are victimized by this. When we're talking about collective trauma, we're talking about how society addresses that, right? And what the psychologists who have looked at this, who have examined this on both sides, have said that each side tends to minimize their part in it and emphasize the other side's part in it. And that's one of the things that allows this to continue.
My other question is, have you ever thought that maybe this situation is like apples and oranges? And one situation doesn't take away from the other? The Holocaust, the Palestinian genocide doesn't take away from the Holocaust that Jewish people and many other people went through. Just like the Holocaust, it doesn't take away from the Palestinian genocide.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Um,
Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear, but that's exactly what I'm saying.
I got black cat, and then Tommy got him. Black and white cat, you raise your hand. Dead and down now, what you shot?
Hi, I just have a few questions. I'm curious about
Okay? Is it to repeat the same mainstream rhetoric that normalizes genocide? Is it to make us feel better, like we're good, the good kind of people who get together to discuss the conflict? What is important about sitting here and compassionately psychoanalyzing the Jews in Israel? What about the extreme and ongoing trauma that the Palestinians are enduring at this very moment? What is the point of continuing to center Jews and Israel in these both sides conversations? Is it so we can just keep talking about it without having to do anything until it's over and all the Palestinians have been killed and forcibly removed from their land? And then we can say, we talked about it. Are we in some way playing our part in the battle of evil? After all, Israel is committing massive war crimes, murdering hundreds of thousands of civilians. With our tax dollars, I think. What is our responsibility in this? Maybe instead of centering the trauma of Jews and justifying the existence and savagery of the Israeli state, we should be focusing on the mass and brutal violence and trauma being inflicted on Palestinians right now. That's what this should be about. Like, what's the point of this conversation if it's not about centering the rights of Palestinians? Like, this, why are we talking about the Holocaust all the time? Like, yeah, that happened and it was a horrific thing. But like, if someone is raped, do you talk about, you know, he had some problems? No, like, that's wrong what's going on. What's happening is wrong, and we need to just focus on that. We should be talking about the crimes that Israel is committing right now, and focusing strictly on that, and like and the rights that the Palestinians have, and how to stop apartheid and dismantle this horrific system that is oppressing people. That's what this should be about. I don't know what this talk is about, just to make us feel better.
Okay, I wanna recenter us real quick and bring us back to the ground rules. I understand again, there's like passion, and there's gonna be time for us to engage in like discussion. We're trying to make time in the program for that. Please have your questions be questions related to the topic that the speaker is talking about. If you have questions about the intent of the program, you're more than welcome to come up to us organizers at the end, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you all about what the intent of what today is. But I would like to recenter us back on what the conversation is taking place. If you have questions related to what she talked about, I will take them. If not, we're going to move on, and we will not have Q&A. I will shut Q&A down. So if your question is directly related to something that she has stated, and you need clarifying information, please raise your hand. This is not a time to grandstand or do any of those kind of things.
That's something related to me.
I'm making a point. I didn't say, hey, Ellie. I didn't say you. I would have said Ellie. I said, I'm reminding everyone, I'm pretty sure I said everyone, of the ground rules. Thank you.
Then let her answer the question.
Ma'am, we're trying to have a conversation, and when you guys do this, it's disruptive, and it's eating into the time that we have here, and it's not productive. I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not. It's not productive. I can do a quick, you want me to do a soft poll? Because we can do a soft poll in the room to see if this is productive or not. By show of hands, if you feel like what's happening right now is productive.
What's productive about listening to these lectures about the Holocaust right now?
No one asked anybody to be here tonight. We extended the invitation for those who wanted to take part in the community conversation. And this is a community conversation. And we're just trying to conversate. We can't solve everything in here. We can't. But what we can do is talk to each other in a respectful way where we're not attacking each other, where you're not attacking the words that people are the knowledge. Because there could be somebody who don't know any of what was just stated. And maybe that then encourages them to dive deeper into the words and do their own research.
Yeah, but you're
And
setting
come
the
to
narrative
terms.
for
Ma'am,
everyone in here to
I'm not setting the narrative.
But it's being set.
I'm not setting the narrative.
It's going to be set and skewed.
I'm not setting the
Right
narrative.
sides it.
I'm not saying it in the narrative. She answered the question, but you're arguing with me for no reason. Tom, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I'd like to pose a question in regards to what you were saying in terms of the number of Jews lost in the Holocaust and the subsequent deaths of Palestinians. Let me just frame the question in this way from a personal experience. In 1959, I was at Dachau out of respect to understand what happened. Soon after, I was in Rome and visited the Aventine Caves. This is a cave where the Nazis took 33, reacted to a bombing near Barberini in central Rome, where 333 Nazis were killed. In retaliation, the Nazis gathered up 335 Roman citizens and put them in the cave and blew the cave up. I was then in Palestine 3 months later, and I met a survivor of Darius Yassin, a teacher who had escaped, and I heard that story. And I think that what I'm asking is that when you take the percentage of the people killed October 7th last year, 130, 1,200, and you compare it to the 40,000 of the last count, curiously, when you divide, you'll see that it comes down to one Jew, a victim of the Nazis, to 333 of the Palestinians who had suffered in Gaza. And I want to kind of take off from what was said earlier in the sense that is why we're here. Because I'm closer to 90 than I am 85. And I have not heard this kind of a discussion, and everybody needs to hear it. And I think that please, among those of you who are objecting and see the immediacy of the situation, understand that us older people have not heard this story that I've known, and I haven't heard talked about in all my life until what happened last year.
I would just emphasize again that you shouldn't get into a numbers game because that's not, it's just not helpful. The real problem is, and I would ask people, did you learn anything from me last night or this evening? Raise your hand if you did. Thank you. Because that's the thing, is that, I taught this course several times. And it's a whole semester-long course. And I wish I had the time to do that for you. Because it is so dense, and it is so complex. And if you want to understand it, you've got to understand all of that. But I only have 20 minutes. I have to take a little slice of the pie to try to increase people's understanding. And the big thing for me is those historical myths. Because too many people just repeat them, and they never challenge them, and they accept them, and it causes huge problems, and it causes tremendous suffering for people. So that's where I'm coming from.
No more questions.
One more question.
No more questions.
No more.
We're on the tight. Thank you. You're welcome. So, coming up to continue this conversation, we have Dan Shaheen, Rabbi Bob, to continue talking about Nakba and the Holocaust. What's the impact on communities, Palestine, Israel, and the U.S.? How do we navigate personal and collective trauma? And how do we hold compassion and
very heavy heart. Last week, I attended a webinar on the situation in the West Bank. One of the speakers from Peace Now in Israel used 3 words to describe the current mood of the Israeli populace. 3 words: depression, despair, fear. I'm feeling them all. And I want to add a 4th that I certainly am feeling: grief. Maybe you're also feeling some or all of these emotions. I'm increasingly fearful about the fate of Israel. I'm increasingly despairing about the path the Israeli government is pursuing. I'm increasingly depressed and fearful about the impact on this war on our Jewish community right here in Humboldt. And I'm grieving the loss of my relationship with both the land of Israel and the state of Israel. Our biblical prophets responded to 2 very clear calls: to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Who would our prophets be speaking to today? Who would they be comforting? And who would they be afflicting? I'm aware of how comfortable I have been throughout most of my life, and especially how comfortable I've been in my Jewish life. But lately, my comfort level is being afflicted by events that certainly concern me, but are mostly beyond my control. I'll share some personal background. I grew up in Manhattan, not Kansas, in the years immediately following the Holocaust. I lived in what felt like a bubble of safety and security. I don't remember ever feeling any anti-Semitism directed at myself or my family. I was 4 years old when the State of Israel was created in 1948. I started going to Hebrew school when I was about 7, less than 10 years after the end of the Holocaust. My teachers were carrying and not handling very well the personal and collective grief, guilt, and trauma that they carried, that Professor Lee was talking about. It was also a glorious time as we celebrated the survival of the Jewish people and the miracle of the establishment of Israel. We celebrated the victory of the nascent Israeli army over the surrounding Arab states. We watched movies about the war and the work and challenges of the early pioneers. We danced Israeli dances. We sang Israeli songs. What a time it was. And we were told a story about it. A story that still wants to cling to me. We learned that the Palestinian residents of Israel had voluntarily left their homes and villages at the urging of Arab leadership. Why? So that the Arab armies could sweep in and overwhelm Israel without fear of harming their own people. Once Israel had been defeated, so we were told, the Palestinians would return to their homes and live in peace. The Jews would be long gone, so we were told. Did we learn anything about the indigenous population, the Palestinians? No. The story we were told was the story of Jewish triumph. This story carried me through my adolescence and, to be truthful, into most of my adult life. I became bar mitzvah 67 years ago. The same year the book Exodus by Leon Uris was published, followed soon by the movie version. I was head over heels in love with everything Israel. It was a glorious time to be Jewish in America. Everyone it seemed was dancing the hora, eating bagels, proudly displaying the Israeli flag. A Holocaust had been defeated. Never again had become right now. Then in 1961, I made my first trip to Israel with 45 other teenagers. We spent the summer traveling through all of Israel. That is, all of Israel as it existed before 1967. We could see the old city of Jerusalem, but we couldn't go there. We heard about the biblical towns on the West Bank, but we couldn't go there. We did float in the Dead Sea, and we hiked up Masada in time to watch the sunrise. We watched the Red Sea actually turn red as the setting sun bounced off the mountains in Jordan. We spent a few weeks living with families on a moshav, a collective settlement. And we were welcomed, very welcomed, into the tents of Bedouin families who were truly hospitable. One thing I noticed as we traveled the country, the people all seemed ready for war at a moment's notice. We knew that virtually every person we saw was ready to disappear into their home and reappear moments later in uniform, fully armed. It was a peaceful time, but everyone knew that the threat of war was ever present. The following summer, I returned with my best friend, and we spent most of the summer working on a kibbutz in Galilee. Turns out this was the same kibbutz that Sean Roon, who we're going to hear from soon, grew up on. On our travels, we found the people we met so friendly and helpful, giving us rides, bringing us into their homes for meals, providing us with places to spend the night. And this stands out. People asked us, two teenage kids from America, why we were living in America when we could be living in Israel. They were very dismissive when we said we were involved with our Jewish life and our synagogue at home. Their response was, we're living here. This is as Jewish as you can get. They said, we don't need the religion because we are living the religion. You should be here, they told us, not New York. These memories of what I call Israel's glory time have carried me for most of my life. But now, I find myself challenged to look more clearly at both the present and past history of the country and the people I have come to love. So, back to the dual message of our prophets. More and more these days, I feel my comfort being afflicted by this war that has gone on for far too long. By a war that makes it impossible for Israelis and Palestinians to see each other as brothers and sisters rather than as enemies. I'm reading the recent book by Rashid Khalidi, The 100 Years War on Palestine. If you haven't heard of this book or read it, give it a shot. This book has challenged most of my lifelong ideas and beliefs about Israel. And I gotta tell you, it hurts. I'm painfully opening to the suffering that my people have caused our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And I find myself in an increasingly uncomfortable position here in our community as I try to find common cause with Jews who are all over the map in terms of how they view this war. And with our Gentile brothers and sisters who are looking for answers and explanations. My comfort is being seriously afflicted by this war. As I said at the outset, I come before you this evening with a heavy heart and no easy answers. The only answer as such that resonates with me is the importance of listening, without judgment, to people on all sides of this issue. Listening to the individual and collective trauma of our own Jewish community, to listen and then listen some more to people very strong feelings and opinions. To listen to people who have more questions than answers. And to listen to people who don't realize that their emotions are impacted by the generational trauma that all Jews feel at some level of consciousness. We have a tradition that says that the first two temples in Jerusalem were destroyed, not by the Babylonians or the Romans, but by what our rabbis call sinat hinim, causeless hatred. It was this causeless hatred among ourselves that sent us into an exile that has lasted for 2,000 years. Challenge I feel right now is to try to not allow sinat hinim, causeless hatred, to destroy our community here in the same way that the earlier Jewish commonwealths were destroyed. Thank you for being here at this challenging time. And thank you for listening. And perhaps you'll join me in this effort to bring healing by truly listening to one another. I want to add something else. I was serving as rabbi in Western Massachusetts at the time of the Second Intifada. And I and several other rabbis decided it was time to start reading the names of people who were being killed. Of course, the goal, the idea was to read the names of all the Jews who were being killed, all the Israelis. And I said, no. Sure, we should read those names, but we need to read the names of the Palestinians who were also being killed, because there were far more of them. So as I look at this list, I'm reminded of that time. And boy, did I take flack for that. Because people said, well, why should we care about the Palestinians who are being killed? And I said, how can we not care about them? Yes.
I just want to say thank you for your presentation, but I think I'm 75 years old and I know about the Holocaust. I've been since I was old enough to watch movies, seeing Schindler's List. I know the stories, not all of them certainly. I'm not Jewish myself, but I'm wondering. I have two questions or comments. How much do the people in this audience know about the history, not of the Jewish people, or in addition to the Jewish people, of the Palestinian people, and what started in 1917, 1914, whatever it was, with the Lord Balfour Declaration about how we're making the state of Israel, about what is going on day in and day out. If you watch ABC News, NBC News, if you're not watching Democracy Now!, you do not know what is going on in Palestine. And I think the American people, because we are sending bombs and guns for the continuing killing of the Palestinian people, need to take that on and learn about the history of the Palestinian people. How many Palestinian presenters are you going to have in your
Right after you.
you know? And I appreciate your talk. I understand the suffering of the Jewish people, but there's a lot more Americans need to know. It's pretty, one last thing I must say, this is getting political, but Kamala Harris, when she said that she will ensure the American people that we will be the most lethal fighting force in the world, she said it during the Democratic convention, and she said it during her debate with Trump. Now that is terrifying to me. So those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
That's why I would recommend that book, 100 Year War.
Yes, I'm reading it.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next speaker because we have a tight schedule
And we want to ensure that there's time and room for the small group discussion because there appears to be a desire to talk. And so we want to ensure that that happens. So, Dan, Shaheen, our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's super meaningful that there's so many people in this community that just want to explore this topic. A lot of ignorance, a lot of misinformation. I'm going to start with a little bit of history about my family. Okay? My name is Daniel Honey Isa Brahim Sulaiman Abdullah Sulaiman Shaheen. The first followers of Jesus came from small villages in Galilee. Christian communities that endured in the villages of the Holy Land until this very day. Some are no longer villages like Bethlehem and Nazareth, the bustling Palestinian cities. In other cases, Christians migrated to new areas. Some of the places in which they resettled remain small villages and are sort of like a window into what life might have been like at the time of Christ, okay? One of these villages is called Ain Arik, which lies in the hills of the West Bank north of Jerusalem, and this is where my family is from. Okay, the village gets its name from its spring and its Canaanite past. Ain Arik means the spring of the Arkites. In the Old Testament era, it was the home of the Arkites, Canaanite clan. Excuse my mispronunciations. The king of Yemen, Zaba, lived in a city called Marib in the times of Alexander the Great, like 200-300 BC, something like that. King Zaba built a large dam to protect the city from flooding caused by the mountain rain. In the 3rd century, there was a heavy flood. It ruined the dam and destroyed the city of Marib, and as a result, the people left the region. A migration of 8 tribes from 2 kingdoms. One tribe settled in Damascus, and the other tribe kingdom was formed in Iraq. Both were Christian under the Great Roman Empire. In the year 638, Muslim Arabs conquered Damascus. Some people turned to Islam, others remained Christian. Rather than convert to Islam, some of the Christians migrated to a town called Al-Balqa near Al-Salt in the kingdom of Jordan. Among the people who did so were 4 brothers, Salah, Khalil, Farah, and Amir. Farah, my ancestor, moved to Ain Arik in the year 1480, a village near Jerusalem and Ramallah, to raise his family. He was probably attracted by the spring and the great farming land of that area. Okay? That's where my family lived. Over 400 years. And then in 1948, the Nakba happened. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs were displaced. Many were killed. Many villages destroyed. Not just destroyed and run out, but they planted trees over where the villages were so they could never become villages again. Okay, the guy who's the hero who planted those trees is a hero in Israeli history. So many of the refugees moved on. But those who remain make up a big part of the population. My grandfather, Isa Shaheen, served in the Ottoman army. This is the only thing that gave him legal standing to his property that his family had farmed for over 400 years. Okay, those who didn't join the army did not have that paper. They did not have any right to their ancestral homelands. Okay? So my grandfather and his wife had 7 children who survived childhood, and at least 5 others that did. My uncle Mufti migrated to America in the late 1950s with $5 in his pocket. He managed to bring over all of his brothers and most of his sisters. My father, John I. Shaheen, was the youngest son, and he emigrated to Pittsburgh in 1962. He was 21 years old. Okay? 500 years, 400, 500 years. And then they all had to leave. The brothers all came and settled in Pittsburgh. This is a tight family. Arabs are tight. Palestinians are tight. Right? That family stayed in Pittsburgh, and then they moved together. All 4 brothers moved to San Jose. I was born in Pittsburgh. We moved there when I was 1, and we lived together as a family, right? As a family unit, because family is so important. That is the core of Palestinian society, being a good family and being a good neighbor. Okay. He married my mother. She's a quarter Lebanese. Quarter Lebanese and 3/4 Palestinian. This is where my prepared remarks are gone. So now let's talk about what happened next. So I was born in 1975 and moved to San Jose in 1976. was synonymous with being a terrorist. The only representation Palestinians got in any kind of media was as a terrorist, sometimes played by Jewish people. This was the background of my life, okay? This is something that I could live. To me, Arabs, I didn't know any Muslim people. I thought Arabs were, I didn't even know I was Palestinian until I was 10 years old. Because my parents didn't want me to talk about that at school, right? You don't talk about being a Palestinian. You're not proud to be a Palestinian. There is no Palestine, right? There's no country recognized that's called Palestine, so you're not. In fact, as many people will tell you to this day, in Arcata City Council meetings, people will tell you that the term Palestinian is just synonymous. It's a blanket term for terrorists, okay? This is something people believe. There's probably people in this room that believe it. So my problem is, I've got 2 children here in Arcata. I've got 2 Palestinian children. Okay? You can call me a terrorist all day long, and I'll actually smile in your face, and I'll have a conversation with you. Because I know something that my uncles always taught us. They would have conversations about politics, mostly in Arabic. And they'd talk about what was going on. And I would ask questions, and they would say, when one of them would say the Jews did something, it would be corrected by my uncle. And say, no, we don't have a problem with Jews. The problem is Israel. Okay, this is the foundation of my education. I grew up with very close Jewish friends. My children have very close Jewish friends to this day. Rabbi Bob, we're buddies, okay? I can be friends with anyone who can treat me and see me as a human. Now, I'm not a religious person. I'm not an atheist. I'm more of a pantheist. Okay? So, gods are fictional characters that we believe in. That's, in my mind, that's what they are. But it doesn't matter. I have a lot of respect for religious people. I have a ton of respect for religious people because all of my family is religious. So many people I know are religious. I have deep respect for that. However, when you let ancient prophecies and religions dictate how you treat other people, other humans, and deny them their heritage, you tell me I don't have, you tell any Jew from anywhere in the world they can go to Israel today and be a citizen and in fact start colonizing and start occupying the occupied territories, but my family who has 500 years plus history in the region, I have no right to move there. And that's the core, that's my trauma, is that I see every day the state of Israel breaking international laws, okay? The ICC and the ICJ were set up in the wake of World War II to prevent the Holocaust from happening again, right? When you deny international law, when you say the ICJ and the ICC and their rulings mean nothing, you are really not doing a favor to the Jewish people or to the Jewish state. I would love for the Jewish state to live up to its press, right? Wow, they're a democracy, right? Man, there are Arabs in the Knesset. There are Arab policemen. But did you know, who here knows that mixed religious marriage is not recognized in Israel? Okay? Who here knows that there are Arabs that are citizens there? Those people have the same basic human rights as other Israelis. This is true. They do not have the same civil rights. Okay, this is the critical distinction. Civil rights are important. We fought for civil rights in this country. It should be abhorrent to every single one of you, every single American who thinks a person gets special rights because of their religion. That's just morally wrong. I don't care what religion you are, what country you're from. So you want to talk about trauma? This is my trauma. And I appreciate those who are bringing up the fact that saying that it's like a victimhood Olympics, right? That is dismissive of the that could happen if Donald Trump were elected, right? But what has Kamala Harris offered to us? Nothing. Pure lip service, pure vibes, and pure feelings. But all she needs to say is one thing, and I'll vote for her. Okay? Here's all she needs to say. I am in favor of conditioning aid to Israel based on the compliance with international law. I don't see that as a controversial statement, and I don't see it as anything that any sane, caring, loving, thinking human being can disagree with. But if you do, come on, let's talk about it. I'll talk to you about it. All right? So this is it. This trauma is, the difference is between the two traumas, people go, man, the Holocaust, 6 million, and then there was only how many? Only a few 100,000 Arabs killed. Dude, it's not the numbers. Dude, it's the fact that one side has zero power in the situation, and the other not only has all the power, but has the full support of the media and the government of this country with my tax dollars, of which I pay a lot. So I don't want my trauma to boil down to my tax bill. And I don't think if my tax bill were lower, I would feel any better about this situation.
We're paying for genocide.
We're paying for genocide.
We are paying for genocide. And I thank you in the audience that agree with me, but I also thank you that don't agree, who are willing to listen and willing to think about it and willing to talk about it, because I recognize some of these things you're hearing tonight you've never heard before. Okay? Some things you know, some things you don't. I learned a lot of things I never knew. I learned about the indigenous Jews of Israel. There were about 20% of the people that were there were Jewish. But why did 20% of the people get 80% of the land? Let's ask the British. Okay? So, we're all still paying for this problem today, and my biggest fear in life is someday somebody's going to call one of my children what they've called me my whole entire life. Right? And when they do that, I don't know how I'm going to react. I hope that my love for my fellow humans, my fellow Americans, because God damn it, I love America too. It's horrible. It's done horrible things. It was founded in genocide as well, and racism. But we've got a North Star that we move towards, right? And that's what we have to be willing to hold a country that calls itself the most moral army in the world, that is the #1 recipient of aid, that is one of the only countries that's allowed to have a foreign lobbying body here on the United States that is putting their finger on the scale on federal and local elections. These are problems that we have to face. That is our call to action. We need to demand that Israel aid be sent to Israel in accordance with their compliance with international law. Period. That's my wish and my hope. Thank you.
I want to thank our guests for all of that. You know, for all of that. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for providing your perspective to this conversation. So now we're going to move into the piece of the program where we get to talk amongst each other. And I'm going to encourage you all to be brave, to not sit by people that you know, to sit with people that you don't know, and to engage in civil, respectful discourse with them. Express your opinions respectfully. Talk to each other, not at each other, please. Listen to each other. Listen to hear instead of listening to
got about, and I'm gonna give you 30. You got 30 minutes for small group discussion. That's it. 30 minutes. Again, move around. I see some of y'all sitting in the same seat. When you sat down, please move around.